I'm tired of the downplay. Zoro versus Akainu isn't close. Here's why. Alright, so today we're going to be analyzing the power of a healthy, full stamina King of Hell Zoro after Wano, and comparing his strength to that of Fleet Admiral Sakazuki in the context of a neutral battle. We're going to be looking at their feats, relevant statements, as well as different elements of portrayal, while doing as little speculation as possible to keep it objective. Starting with Akainu. Now, most of his scaling comes from Whitebeard and Aokiji, but Aokiji honestly doesn't have many showings where he's going all out for us to really gauge his power, so this analysis is going to focus on Marineford Whitebeard. In terms of strength, we see that he is able to somewhat match Whitebeard's swing of the Naginata, though this swing was aimed to crowd control random Marines, so it's a stretch to say that this is his full power. In terms of attack potency, we see that he is able to easily get through Whitebeard's face and part of his skull, as well as Jinbei's entire body using magma, and that he was able to take Aokiji's legs, though we can't really be sure what condition Aokiji was in when that happened. Nevertheless, this is impressive as Aokiji can take attacks from current Garp, but that being said, we're not sure what condition Garp is relative to his prime, and it's really difficult to scale the current Hachinosu feats, like is Pizarro Yonko level? Maybe. Additionally, it is stated in his viewer card that the Magma Fruit has the best attack power among Devil Fruit, which is quite impressive. Some people claim that this means that it refers to the fruit merely being on the highest level of attack power, with other fruits being on that level, but from my reading of the kanji, it most likely means number 1, the very peak. That being said, it refers to the power of the fruit separate from its usage, so it's ambiguous if Akainu's attacks would scale to more advanced techniques such as Big Mom's combined homie attacks or Devil Fruit awakenings. Now let's get into his speed. He should basically be relative to old Whitebeard, as they can exchange blows with each other in the fights that we see. We also see Akainu demonstrating enough defensive speed to evade the attacks of Marco, Vista, and Jinbei, almost like Katakuri. His attack speed, on the other hand, seems to be relatively lacking, as they are regularly intercepted or dodged. We also know that, in general, Kizaru is faster than him due to Kizaru's viewer card stating so. Regarding his observation, like we said earlier, he could evade attacks from the likes of Marco and Vista, but at the same time reacted to Whitebeard slower than the nameless Marines around him. So it's definitely not the most consistent thing ever. The most interesting part of Akainu's scaling is honestly his defense, which I think is somewhat overlooked, but I think this is his greatest asset overall. Just by passively turning into magma, he is able to disintegrate a sword that's not even making contact with the magma directly, effectively shielding him from any weak attacks. He's also able to take 2 enraged quake punches from Whitebeard with relatively minor injury, healthy enough to fight the Whitebeard commanders a few chapters later. Theoretically, he should be able to create a giant magma wall to protect himself, but he hasn't been shown to use this in a typical strategy, so we're not going to necessarily consider that. He has some decent mental showings in terms of manipulation, but since he knew the war was happening ahead of time, we can't know if he needed prep time in order to perform the way he did. Oh, and we also know that he has armament emission, which helps him for even more defense, as well as environmental manipulation just by spreading magma everywhere. Now let's get into Zoro. Zoro's strength can be compared to that of early hybrid Kaido, as when using Ashura, he can push back Kaido's attacks. It can be seen in the manga by the sound effects, though it is much more detailed in the anime. In terms of AP, or attack potency, he is able to cut and even scar hybrid Kaido with Ashura Deadman's Game, also capable of cutting Dragon Kaido with Tatsumaki. Kaido is famed for having such great durability to the point that doing any damage at all is extremely difficult, so these feats are extremely impressive. Then Zoro goes on to fight King, who is even more durable than Kaido. King is so durable with flames on that he isn't even slightly damaged by attacks that would draw blood from Kaido. Zoro then gains access to Advanced Conqueror's Haki, at which point his regular attacks are more of a threat to King than his named attacks prior. Moving on to speed, we observe that base Zoro is relative to flames on King. When King goes into speed form with the flames off, we observe that King is able to totally exit Zoro's sight. However, with the advanced conquerors active, Zoro can then completely bridge this gap and easily land hits on even speed mode King, going so far as to blitz him outright in the final exchange. Now with that speed increase in mind, consider the fact that Zoro with 30 broken bones could outspeed and land a huge attack on hybrid Kaido. And then you can start to understand just how ridiculous King of Hell Ashura would actually be. Advanced Conquerors is just an absolutely absurd power-up. Some people think that Zoro used it on the rooftop because Kaido stated he could use Conquerors, but in context this almost certainly refers to regular Conquerors as opposed to the advanced variation, as he then goes on to state that a dead man walking would be unable to use such a power, like a few pages later. This statement makes no sense if Zoro used Conqueror's coding on the rooftop. Bro was a dead man walking. Now let's move on to his defensive capabilities. Zoro with his swords can single-handedly block the Ocean Sovereignty attack, which was considered a threat to the entire Rooftop 5. He had 30 broken bones after, but continued to fight through it, so that just upscales his endurance. He also gets in position to block much faster than Locke and set up a teleport, so that can be used to scale his speed if you'd like. With less stamina than was required to stand up, Zoro was still able to take an attack, which wasted Law, even somewhat remaining conscious as he was able to observe Luffy's growth. He can also just cut attacks, including magma-like attacks. I'm just saying. Now that we've gone over showings on both sides, let's envision how this fight will go. At the start of the fight, Akainu would immediately try to kill Zoro. Unfortunately, none of his attacks would actually land. Just think about the attacks he managed to connect. Ace and Jinbei were actively trying to body block. Here Whitebeard was immobilized by a heart attack. And here he was ready to die, so he allowed an almost fatal blow to return a devastating counter. If it's not in close quarters, his case is even worse. And Zoro's attacks travel relatively large distances. Fortunately, Akainu is not completely doomed, as if the fight drags long enough, he would be able to eventually fill the environment with magma and restrict Zoro's movement. On a good day, he would actually be safe from Zoro's basic attacks, as Marco is basically relative to Flames on King. His speed on defense is just much more impressive than his attack speed. But the moment Zoro decides to unleash the King of Hell, things would change massively. With the extra speed from Advanced Conquerors and the use of his various blitz techniques, Zoro would easily be able to tag his opponent. But would Zoro be able to deal significant damage? Yes, the answer to that question is yes. Remember that casual swings from current Zoro are stronger than those that could cause Kaido to bleed. There ain't no way that Akainu's skin is stopping those attacks. Quake punches are strong for sure, but let's not forget that Blackbeard had to eat one as well. This Blackbeard. Don't like feats involving Luffy? Alright, how about Law's attack matching a Quake punch? And even if Akainu somehow dodges or miraculously survives Zoro's named attacks, Ashura just gives Zoro another lair, which, let's not forget, turned a losing fight into a one-hit KO back in Eni's lobby. But what if Zoro gets hit by magma? He immediately dies from the slightest contact, right? Well, no, not really. Remember that Zoro could perform his best attack with 30 broken bones. You'd need a lot of magma. See Jinbei? Bro's apologizing after getting impaled that he didn't sacrifice himself enough. Remember this guy? Well, he's named Kuriel, and yet this is him like a day later at Whitebeard's funeral. To recap, Zoro can easily one-shot Akainu with any of his named attacks if he decides to use Advanced Conquerors. Meanwhile, Akainu's attacks wouldn't even be able to make contact with Zoro. Not only does Zoro win against the Red Puppy, it's not even remotely close. Now I'll address some of the portrayal arguments and why they don't really work. Akainu is a fleet admiral, whereas Zoro only beat a first commander. The moment Zoro found out that he could hurt Flame Mode King, he immediately blitzed and one-shot him, so they're not even that close. Also, the first commander is a fan-made category in terms of them all being relative in strength, Mihawk is currently a first commander. Akainu has better portrayal overall. Zoro himself has incredible portrayal, which gets overlooked. Having access to a power stated by Kaido to only be used by a few of the very strongest being a great example. There's nothing about the Fleet Admiral which beats Conqueror's coding in portrayal. Akainu fought Whitebeard, who was the world's strongest man. Whitebeard at Marineford was massively nerfed. He was stated to have weakened massively to let Squardo have a chance of stabbing him. He was then weakened more from the stab, and then he got a heart attack, and then was impaled by magma, then got stabbed some more. And he couldn't use Conqueror's Haki, which, as we know now, is an enormous power-up. Akainu is Luffy's future opponent, so he must be stronger than Zoro. Now, I can't disprove this claim, but I must point out that it's vague speculation at best. Yes, Luffy has a hatred for Akainu after the death of Ace. But guess what? Akainu has a just as pronounced hatred for Dragon. There's also this narrative that he and the Marines in general are future opponents, as if Marineford wasn't already an arc with them as the main antagonists. Also, Akainu can still be a major threat without being well off in a neutral battle. In the context of a war, for example, he could have prep time, which makes a massive difference, as it allows him to essentially build tons of magma defenses. Green Bull no-diffed King and Queen. This is certainly an interesting argument. The stuff with Green Bull is honestly enough to get its own video. Like, he's one of the weirdest guys to scale. On one hand, Green Bull is this black blade wielding, Lunarium piercing, god fruit, top one in the verse. On the other hand, yeah, I don't know. I think that's basically comprehensive. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're an Akainu fan and have a counter, feel free to leave it in the comments below, but do try to actually consider and address the points I've made instead of ignoring them. Zoro's simply him. He's built like that.